Thank you very much for that. And thanks to the CRC for allowing me the opportunity to come and talk to you guys. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is some of the past work that I've done with the CRC in the monitoring and wellbeing space, as well as some of the commercial realities in this space. Obviously that's from an Allflex perspective, so I have a focus on the dairy industry particularly and on the beef industry as well. But that should give you an idea of what kind of technology and what kind of opportunities are actually out there, a lot of them Mark just talked about, that we can hopefully pull back into the sheep industry in the future. I'll also cover some of the current limitations that we have. So essentially asking that question, why isn't this technology or more of this technology already in the sheep industry? So about 5 years ago, I started working with the Sheep CRC Extension in Program 1, and it was led by Professor Jeff Hinch. We were tasked essentially with improving sheep wellbeing and productivity using sensors. Now, Jeff and I had the brilliant idea that what we should do was look at sheep behaviour and really try and get a handle on what sheep behaviour baselines look like, so that, as you guys will all know, if something goes wrong with your animals, if they're under a challenge or under stress, they're ill or injured, their behaviours are the first things that will change for them. So we thought if we could understand sheep behaviour and that baseline behaviour, when that changed, we'd then be able to provide useful information and support to the producer that there was something going wrong, and we'd be able to improve and manage a little more proactively. Essentially what we were asking was, if your sheep looks like this and you understand the behaviours, what changes when she starts to look a little bit more like this? A little bit sad. So we obviously were using sensors. We needed those to be real time and we needed those to be automated, because nobody was going to sit in a paddock and monitor this for fun. Although I did have some students I may have made do a little bit of that. So we also set ourselves the goal of using technology that was readily available in a commercial environment. And what we ended up with was an EID tag, a panel, and a controlled traffic zone. So what we were essentially doing was very similar to what Mark was talking about, monitoring sheep going into and out of a controlled traffic zone. So obviously they could only go in one at a time. We would then get the unique number and we would get a date time stamp. And our thinking was that if we could monitor that pattern of movement and something changed about that pattern, that might tell us something really useful about what was going on with those sheep. We had a lot of options and lots of things we could look at. We managed to get through quite a few of them. We didn't get to water intake and body posture, so demeanour changes. But out of some of those things that we did manage to look at, I think we found some really interesting results. I could be a little biased on that. We found out, for example, that if you look at social networks in sheep, then they do change when you parasitise an animal. So an animal which has a heavy Haemonchus contortus burden is a lot less sociable than he was before you made him sick, oddly enough. We also found out that he was less sociable to all the others in his group as well. We looked at things like movement order, and it turns out when you lead a sheep around a paddock repeatedly over a long period of time, the few at the front are really reliable. They will always be at the front. But there's quite a lot of variation in the animals and the rest of the mob. So while we found some really interesting things, for the sort of subtle behavioural changes we were looking for, we really didn't get quite enough information out of that. And what we came to the conclusion in the end was that while we had, as I said, some fascinating data, we needed to almost combine that with some on-animal monitoring as well, bearing in mind that this was mostly off-animal passive sensing that we were looking at. So then I jumped into the commercial world, and it turns out that Jeff and I had a great idea, and that's exactly what everybody else was doing. So everybody, well not everybody, a lot of the companies in the commercial world working in on-animal sensing were using this same approach. We're looking at baseline behaviours and how that changes. So if you have a dairy cow, for example, she looks quite normal. You want to understand what her behaviours look like when she's feeling particularly good about life. Equally, you need to understand how her behaviours change when she's not feeling quite so good. So in 2014, Allflex purchased an Israeli-based company called SCR. Now, SCR had already been, at the time of purchase, monitoring those behaviour changes, monitoring rumination and different behaviour changes for about 20 years. So they already had a collar and a tag system for dairy cows. Because of that collaboration with Allflex, and as I'm sure many of you know, the ID and the visual tag products, because Allflex has that specialty, we were able to create the same technology in a much smaller version. So we've now got that same technology in an ear tag. And we've just released a new version, which is for dairy calves. So you can put this on your calves at 1 day old, and you'll start to get some information on that animal 24 hours later. The data that comes in from that tag is a constant stream, and it gets classified every minute. That classified data forms a data packet, and then that's transferred to a base unit which is hooked up to your computer, or you can tap into it through your laptop or however you like. That data packet gets transferred every 20 minutes, and for 3 years if it's an ear tag, the battery lasts for 3 years, and for 7 years if it's a collar. So that's a constant stream of a lot of data coming in. The algorithms which classify that data are essentially based on 220 years of information coming off a 1,500 cow dairy herd. So this is a huge body of work which has gone into really underpinning these algorithms and making them particularly accurate. This is my favourite. This is a fantastic graph that the producer will never see, so don't stress. Basically what it shows you is what some of the, not the raw data, but some of the rawer data looks like. And what you get is all of those colours on there are different behaviours, and you can see how they change over time and then across the day. So of particular interest, for example, you've got a sort of a light purple strip coming down there. That's some really strong feeding behaviour that you see about 6:30 every morning from this cow in particular. As we get sort of coming down, we're moving into September, looking down the timeline, down the y-axis there, you'll see there's some dark purple dots coming up. So that's picking up an animal which is suffering a little bit from heat, and she's starting to show some panting behaviours. Now, as I said, the producers don't see this. This all sits in the background. What a producer would see, for example, is something like this. The system was designed originally to detect heat, so reproductive behaviour, and to detect health issues. This is a beautiful example of heat detection in a dairy cow. So you've got a health index, which comes down the side here, and along the bottom you've got time. And what you'll see is that this is the same for a lot of different components that the system picks up. It's never usually based on one factor, it's always a combination to make it a little more accurate. What you'll see is we've got activity change in green, and you've got rumination change in purple, and you get a beautiful spike in activity at the time of when the animal's actually mounting other animals, and at the same time you'll get a drop in rumination. So you get this perfect diamond pattern, all going well, and it happens approximately every 21 days. The system takes into account that particular spike, that particular drop, the length of those spikes and drops. It weights all of that information, and it sends an alert or a list to the producer that says cow 23 is ready to be inseminated. This is also a really nice example of the system detecting a health issue. It's off a different sort of software, so the actual image is a little bit different to the last one. But again, you've got what down here is rumination, effectively rumination minutes, and ruminations in purple. You've got this axis here also operating for the activity trend, which is an index, and a health trend, which is also an index from 1 to 100. If you look at this, you'll see that the health trend comes down. So health always starts at 100. We assume an animal is 100% healthy, and as we pick up behavioural changes, it loses points, essentially. So that's what's happening here. You've got a cow which was identified by this. That's an alert going out to the producer. The producer could go out at that point, have a look at the animal. He was actually able to treat it. She had a fever, and he gave her some antibiotics, and you can see the response to that. So really useful to look at efficacy as well. Can we do this in sheep? Yes, we can. Why haven't we? There is a bit of a gap. I've talked to industry, I've talked to commercial companies and a lot of technology companies, and we have a bit of a gap. It's made up with a variety of different questions and a lot of different things in there. What features are most useful to a producer? What model do we use to produce this kind of stuff? A lot of it's in the value. Something like this has to have value to a producer in terms of it does what I need, it costs what I'm willing to pay, and it lasts as long as I need it to. On the other hand, as a commercial company, we also need a value proposition to be there. We need to make money out of it, otherwise nobody's going to produce it. However, I think these two are really starting to come together a little bit more. So in summary, we have some really exciting opportunities, and I'm quite optimistic about how we're going to get through all of this. We do have some big challenges ahead of us, though, to make some really useful outcomes. And just many thanks to the team I worked with at the Sheep CRC and the CRC and UNE. Thank you.